Je suis heureux de vous présenter le professeur Cliff Goddard de Griffith University. Il est donc venu de Brisbane, Queensland, spécialement pour nous. C'est un spécialiste des aspects cognitifs et culturels, de la sémantique et de la pragmatique comparée ou interculturelle, cross-cultural. Parmi ses travaux, il a travaillé avec Anna Wierzbicka et il est co-auteur avec elle de Meaning and Universal Grammar, mais il est aussi auteur par lui-même de divers ouvrages, notamment autour du concept d'ethnopragmatique, Ethnopragmatics, Understanding Discourse in Cultural Context, chez Mouton de Gruyter, c'était je crois en 2006, ou encore Cross-Linguistic Semantics, chez John Benjamins en 2008. Le titre de sa conférence, eh bien, vous le voyez affiché. Je ne me permettrai pas le trait d'humour de le lire en anglais, mais peut-être celui d'essayer de le traduire. Donc l'approche ethnopragmatique et les défis que pose la recherche sur l'humour conversationnel à travers langues, cultures et contextes. La conférence est en anglais et on pourra ensuite prendre quelques questions en anglais ou en français. Dans ce cas, elles seront traduites pour le professeur Goddard par Kerry Mallon et Christine Béal. La parole est à vous. Ah. C'est le son.
Do you need sound? Okay, so we can yeah. Just put the sound off there to make sure. Okay. We still have the microphone? Is that okay?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for coming. You know the title of my talk. In a way, it's very evident that there are many good things happening in the field of humour studies. So it's a little perverse of me to actually start off with problems and challenges, but that's what I'm going to do. And I also want to apologise in advance for my utterly minimal knowledge of French, which you'll see at various times. So please forgive me on that. This is the outline of my talk, which, as you can see, is in 8 parts. The first couple of parts are to do with what I'm calling problems and challenges, and they basically turn on the difficulty of comparative, of being systematic and comparative at the same time. And advancing to the idea of the ethnopragmatic approach and what that can add. I'm not proposing to replace everything with the ethnopragmatic approach, but to add something to other research methodologies which are currently being used. Then we transit through some terms, you'll see why, namely laugh and play, because I think they are actually okay terms to work with cross-linguistically, because evidence indicates that these concepts are lexicalised in nearly the same meaning, or perhaps exactly the same meaning, in different languages of the world. Whereas this does not apply to words like humour, joking, teasing, and so on. So the final part of the talk is to show you in some detail what detailed semantic analysis of those terms looks like using the technique of semantic exploitation. Finally, the ways forward, and trying to be realistic what barriers there are to progress, because of course there are some. If you look in a sample of current scholarship, good work, maybe 10 or so papers or books I consulted, you see that English is used freely in this Anglophone writing. So the resources, the lexical resources of the English language are just used freely. They include words like joking, teasing, and recently kidding. Speech act words, there are also these words for categories or sort of micro-genres, such as wisecrack, quip, pun, joke, and anecdote. I'm sure people with multilingual or bilingual backgrounds are very aware of the non-translatability or non-equivalence of some of these words in your own languages. And of course it's very notable that a number of these terms, such as quip, are very rare in ordinary spoken English, and some terms like wisecrack are unknown in some dialects of English, or are known but not used, for instance, in Australian English. As well as that, terms like banter, wordplay and repartee have been noted. There are adjectives describing the quality, so to say, funny and amusing. Both terms are used. Playful, not serious, and witty. And on it goes. Both the adjectives and the nouns, which may have slightly different meanings, ironic and irony, sarcastic and sarcasm. And in these articles which use these terms, when the term is in focus, being introduced perhaps for the first time and it's playing a key role, sometimes the authors do attempt to explain it or to characterise it. But many of the others, actually they don't. They just use them freely to explain what they're talking about. The terms, when they are defined, their definitions are, in my opinion, not very adequate. And you'll find plenty of other examples on the handout. Do you have this handout? There's a handout which has just examples, explications and references. So the whole kind of text of the talk is not there, but those simple things that you might want to look at are there. So for instance, Holmes and Mara define quip as a short, witty, but also ironic comment about the ongoing transaction or topic under discussion, a witty aside. So evidently this definition relies on equally problematical words such as witty and ironic, although it has some value because it mentions short. And banter, in another work, rapid exchange of humorous lines oriented towards a common theme, though aimed primarily at mutual entertainment. So this one depends rather importantly on the word entertainment and of course on humorous. If you were to try to work through all of the definitions, and it's a maze, and it's very unsystematic. So it's basically subject to all the usual confusions of conventional dictionaries, such as circularity, vagueness, obscurity, and as I said, there are other examples on the handout. To make matters worse, the sort of ordinary English becomes technicalised very quickly. And sometimes this technicalised English is quite obvious. So for instance, Culpeper and Bousfield and Leach seem to be quite pleased with this very nice logical equation that sarcasm can be defined as mock politeness and banter as mock impoliteness. Now, of course, those definitions would have no plausibility at all if the word politeness was being used in its ordinary language sense. So they can only be viable, to the extent that they are viable, using some technical concept of politeness. Well, we all know that politeness has become a technicalised term, and also impoliteness. In ordinary English, very ordinary sarcastic expressions like "my heart bleeds for you," very hard to see that as mock politeness. Anyway, the other point that I want to make, aside from the intrusion of these sort of technicalised concepts, is that they mix them with others, such as mock. So what does mock mean? Actually, there's a fashion for mock. So we not only have mock politeness and mock impoliteness, we have mock abuse and even mock sarcasm, and a number of other mock terms. If you look at a recent paper by my colleague Michael Hoare and Derek Bousfield, they were trying to clarify Culpeper's use of the term mock, and so they adduced the definitions from the Merriam-Webster's dictionary, and this is what they look like. Having the character of imitation, simulated and feigned to look like the real thing, not based on real feelings. You might think that's not too bad, despite the use of these complicated words like simulated, feigned and so on. But it misses out a very fundamental thing, that mock performances are intended to be recognisable as mock. For some reason, Merriam-Webster just missed this. And for some reason, Michael and Derek missed it too, even though it's actually critical to the logic of the whole argument. There are other examples on the handout. So at the risk of being provocative, this seems to be the way. You start with ordinary English words which are poorly defined or undefined. Then you technicalise them, extending their range of use. Often you coin some new terms. So from joking you use jocular, and we have a number of things: jocular teasing, jocular mockery, and so it goes. You may make up new coinages, so you may start talking not only about teasing, but you may call the thing that the person says, you may call it a tease, which is a technical sense, because in ordinary English we don't talk about what somebody says as a tease, let alone of anybody receiving a tease or evaluating a tease. And then shortly, different scholars, sometimes using different raw materials, in other words, different ordinary English words, repeat the same process or modify slightly, and then a discourse begins about what the technical terms mean. What do we mean by our technical terms? How do they relate to each other? And at this point, the phenomenon starts to be less and less. The topic becomes ourselves, essentially. The topic becomes our discourses. And in a sense, we know that this is an occupational hazard of academics, but let's just face it, this is the reality. The discussion becomes academic in the worst sense of the word. But actually the problem runs deeper than that. Here I want to mention this, in my view, wonderful book by Anna Wyzbicka called Imprisoned in English. It's a paperback, tremendously exciting and accessible book full of intellectual depth. And the subtitle is The Hazards of English as a Default Language. That's the second part of my talk. The hazards of English as a default language. Now, of course, with English becoming a global lingua franca, in the hard sciences it already is, in the social sciences increasingly so, the danger and the likelihood of English sort of dominating, the conceptual categories of English dominating scholarly discourse becomes even greater. Various scholars who have overviewed humour forms, scholars who I admire, such as Neil Norrick and Marta Dinell and Langlotz, a new work from, I think he's Swiss, provide taxonomies of humour forms, but they hardly ever look at any languages other than English. The taxonomy of humour forms is constructed from the vocabulary of English, words like quip and pun and wordplay and so on. Why should that be? Why should a taxonomy of humour forms be based on English? Answer: no reason. At the same time, we know that lots of terms of ordinary English, such as humour, joke, wit and serious, actually do not have semantic equivalents in other languages. I mean precise equivalents. This is a well-known fact. And equally, it's a well-known fact that many languages, including French, but also other languages, have their own, shall we say, humour-related words which lack precise equivalents in English. Well, surely this terminological ethnocentrism of doing things in English is matched by a kind, well, this is a more debatable claim, but I'll make it. It's matched by and accompanied by a kind of conceptual Anglocentrism. It's not just that we're using English words because they're handy, but perhaps in some way they're neutral and it doesn't matter. On the contrary, by buying into the interpretive resources of one language to the exclusion of others, you cannot avoid some kind of conceptual influence on the theory you build, despite your efforts to make it universal, or despite your efforts to technicalise the terms and save them from their English origins. Nonetheless, some kind of Anglocentric bias comes in. And I think this is what Wyzbicka was really trying to call in her book Imprisoned in English. So just a couple of brief examples. You'll have to, my pronunciation of the author of this monumental book, this is the English version of the Dictionary of Untranslatables, which is a monumental work. There are entries on wit and humour. which are very instructive, and it's clearly recognised by philosophers, historians, and I suppose cultural historians, the untranslatability. Well, we heard already there's an established topos of discussing the word humour in its variations between English and French. And the author here points out that humour, back already in the days of Samuel Johnson's Dictionary of the English Language, already contained traces of this humour anglaise with its peculiar Englishness as far as the French see it, referring to a singular way of laughing that is very English. And the term humour not having that same designation in France doesn't serve very well to characterise this. So the meaning can be, as he says, quite indeterminate for a French person. And if you would look at the actual French, leading French words, such as the list here, rire, rigoler, marrant, and the others, except for rire, which closely matches laugh, all the others appear to have very significant differences in meaning from their apparent dictionary translations in English. And I'll leave it to you to figure out some of them, but I'll certainly be looking into the English terms, and partly I hope by laying their structure bare, it will become more obvious to francophones where differences are, and you can start to advance the program. Likewise in German. Freud's book, which is translated into English as jokes, and normally the conventional translation is jokes and their relation to the unconscious, has been a perennial bugbear for translators because the key expression, der Witz, does not really have a good English translation, nor does it have a good French translation. And there's a long literature on the problems of translating these terms. Just continuing on to German just briefly, one of the quite remarkable things I believe about the German language is that it really doesn't have any verbs that are comparable to joking and kidding. One expresses it using a construction with make or machen and the Witz or Witze, and you may also use the word Spaß, which is another semi-translatable word, something like fun but not quite. And you can see some of these expressions here, and they also have this word Scherz, which is another kind of humorous form. So you can see, even in Europe, which is far from the world, I mean Europe is a small patch on the planet, and even languages in very comparable cultures, if you would compare it with Chinese and Zulu, very comparable cultures, there's a lack of comparability in very basic terminology, and it's a blind spot. Everybody knows, no one wants to do anything about it. And to make matters even worse, triply worse, even within Englishes, there are variations. So I mentioned before that wisecrack is not a term used in Australian English. Likewise, I've done some checking in American lexicon, a term like razzing. You may not know this term, but it's listed in the American dictionaries and thesaurus as a normal term, razzing, unknown in Australian English. Joshing, which is an American interactive form, is recognisable by Australians but not used in Australian English. In Australia, of course, the famous taking the mickey and taking the piss, shared with British English. So even within Anglo-English, you can't find strict comparability between dialectal variants of English. So really we need to do something. Before I get to that, I just want to show you this quotation which I found recently, and I think it's absolutely terrific. So, and I'm rather pleased that it emerged from the tradition of ethnomethodology and conversation analysis. So these two authors, Goddard and Platt, I believe, they were kicking off from an observation made by Garfinkel, as so many people have done. Garfinkel and Goffman being the two great inspirers of so many. And they observed that anthropologists, when they do their work, they create a glossary in English of the native terms. And then very often from then on, they use their glosses as if they were truly what the natives meant. And that's their word. The analyst recommends to colleagues that his translations of the natives' terms are what the natives were really talking about, even though at the beginning one introduces them with some caution. But pretty soon the gloss takes over. And Goddard and Pratt comment further. They use this lovely expression, inverting the gloss. So by inverting the gloss, the analyst asserts that the native means, what the native means by some remarks is what the analyst means in his or her analysis. And the result of the inverted gloss is that the logical properties that would obtain for the theorist's questions and answers are attributed to the members' talk. Members meaning the people here. And if you ask me, terms like sarcasm equals, mock politeness. And it can happen even within your own language. An inverted gloss can occur. And the logic of the analyst's problems, like how to set up these nice equations and how to use our terminology in a very balanced way, start to take over. And pretty soon that's dominating the discourse. Of course, it's well known within our field that there's a distinction between first order and second order concepts. Watts and others introduced this idea in relation to politeness. So the so-called politeness 1, which means, roughly speaking, what ordinary people mean by the word politeness, and politeness 2, which is supposed to mean what we technical analysts mean by politeness. But I'm sure that if you look at many works, the difference between 1 and 2 is often lost sight of. And there's a continual slippage between the ordinary meaning use and the technicalised use, with the result that there's confusion and a loss of the insider perspective. By using technicalised versions with the analyst's logic dominant, one loses the participant's own orientations, the participant's own view of what is going on. How can we maintain a view of what the participants, the people, what? This is the whole point of ethnopragmatics. So coming to ethnopragmatics, the idea of ethnopragmatics is to try to understand people's ways of doing things from their point of view. That's it, in a nutshell. The connection with translation and with semantics, let me say in the past most people would see translation as a kind of a nuisance. It's a problem. Let's move on. But if you adopt an ethnopragmatic approach, then actually the different words that exist in different languages become a resource. They become a way of finding out something about those people, about the ways they see things, about the categories and values that are embedded in their, taken for granted. They're taken for granted in their ways of speaking. But to do that inquiry, you need to look at the local categories and local ways of speaking. In other words, minimally the lexical items. And when you try to describe the meanings of those terms, you want to avoid the inverted gloss. So you want to not describe the meanings of any words using technicalised English. You want to use something which is as plain and translatable as possible. Ideally, you want to use simple cross-translatable words. You need to discipline yourself to, formulate your understanding of somebody else's meanings using simple cross-translatable words. How will you know what is a simple cross-translatable word? Well, we can rely on a very long program of cross-linguistic research, originated and inspired by Professor Anna Wierzbicka, still at the Australian National University in Canberra, but obviously Polish born and educated. And there are numerous publications in this framework, and I'm going to summarise the key details of it and then get to the application. So here are some key details. Well, actually, first I wanted to let you know that there's a vibrant and growing research community in cross-linguistic semantics and ethnopragmatics. And as you can see from this, this is Professor Wierzbicka here. I want to mention Bert Peters because he's the leading francophone writer in natural semantic meta-language. We have a number of people from different countries and areas of the world. It's true that this approach originated, well, originated is not quite the right word, but it took root, I suppose, in Australia about 30 years ago, and it is still strongest in Australia. But there are now advanced level practitioners in various countries of the world, Poland, and Denmark and Israel and Singapore. It's a fairly eclectic combination. And the trajectory of the NSM approach and the kind of, how to say, the uptake of these ideas, I think is growing, especially among graduate students and younger researchers who are not so locked into the past. Of course, there are also many opponents of the NSM approach, but that's only to be expected. If you are interested, there is a web page called Natural Semantic Metalanguage homepage. You can find it by searching Griffith, that's the name of my university, plus NSM, or by some other methods. It's very discoverable using Google, and there are many different web pages, and there are literally hundreds of published articles. I'm not kidding, there are dozens of books and hundreds of articles. Roughly speaking, that's what we think are, using English. This is a table of words whose meanings are, we believe, as simple as you can get, and attested in as words or as the meanings of words or common expressions in a wide range of typologically and geographically diverse languages. Of course, many of these words are polysemous in their meaning and may have two or three meanings. The claim is that one meaning, the sort of main one, the simplest one, is renderable transparently into other languages. So comparable tables to this list exist in French, of course, and German and Russian and Finnish, Japanese, Chinese, Vietnamese, Wolof from West Africa, and Koromu from Papua New Guinea, and East Cree from Canada. Of course, this is a very small sample of the world's languages, but nonetheless, the fact that the 65 semantic primes, as they're called, do appear to have good lexical equivalence in such diverse languages is has very strong evidential value, because very few words will match up like that across languages. Very, very few. Now, the NSM and people don't believe that you can explain all meanings in terms of this tiny mini vocabulary of 65 words. In fact, we recognise that there are also some other important words whose meanings are, so to say, basic, and they play a part in the meanings of many other words. They themselves can be resolved into semantic primes, but they function as chunks. And we call those semantic molecules. Here's a list of some of the more important universal semantic molecules. You can see that there are some body part words like hands and mouth, ears, eyes, head, nose. There are some social categories like men, women and children, and other terms, the idea of being born, some physical descriptive words like round and long and flat. And some environmental words, the sun, the sky, ground, water, fire. Some other bio words like perhaps creature and grow, as in growing in the ground. And a very small number of verbish kind of words. I'm not going to go into all that, it's very well treated in existing NSM literature. But the current view is that most of these terms exist in all or most languages of the world, nearly identically in terms of meaning. So this is a sort of safe ground. 65 primes plus a similar number of other words. You're looking at a vocabulary of 120, 130 words. But it's getting versatile, it's getting practical. From this you may be able to build a conceptual lingua franca, which is in fact independent of the English language, which could be manifested equally in other languages of the world. That's the ideal. There are three words that are very relevant to humour studies, as you can see: play and laugh, and less directly, but you'll see why in a moment, the term children. So these three semantic molecules, plus quite a goodly proportion of the other semantic primes, especially the idea of feeling something good, the idea of someone saying something, people feeling something good because of it. These are sort of ingredients in humour concepts. So the way NSM people and ethnopragmatic people do, they have several different techniques. The one I'm going to concentrate on showing you today is called semantic exploitation. So basically this is an attempt to paraphrase the meaning of a word using only very simple cross-translatable words. There is also something called cultural scripts, which we use a lot. Cultural script is kind of like a norm of interpretation or a norm of, what's it called? Interaction. Or values or standards which are not necessarily vested in a single word. But it's very useful to try to state those also using this same vocabulary of simple cross-translatable words. But I'm not going to go into that here. The main point though is because when you do this analytical aspect using cross-translatable words, you make the meanings accessible to speakers in other languages, because they can be rendered into their other languages. Nothing you say using this vocabulary is conceptually spun into English. The analysts may make a wrong analysis, yes, that's always true. But the very terms of description are not sending you already into the areas of conceptual bias. So I'm now going to give you some, to show you some explications. If you've never seen them before, they will look pretty strange. But nonetheless, they should seem intelligible to you, right? In other words, you read, you think, you understand. It should be. So we'll start with something rather simple, which is playing. And playing has always been an important word in the discourse of humour, back to Bateson, but also much earlier, back to antiquity, in fact. What does it mean to say that someone's playing? Because the word play has several meanings, but our idea would be to start with a simple frame like someone is playing, or was playing, with someone else. What does it mean? So according to our understanding, it means that this someone was doing something with someone else for some time. So playing is an activity. In this case, with someone else for some time, as children often do. So there's a prototype based on children, as children often do when they do something with some other children, because they want to feel something good, not because of anything else. And this not because of anything else is quite important aspect to the concept of playing. So we have the idea that it's an activity characterised by reference to children's activity directed solely, so to say, for feeling something good. And there are other examples and a bit of evidence on the handout. When you look at the term laughing, you will be very surprised to see the amount of detail in this word. So I'll just go through it. Basically the idea seems to be that when someone is laughing, that the person's doing something for some time, and at the same time something's happening to some parts of this person's body, not because they wanted it. So there's an involuntary accompaniment of this. The central part of the explication which I've put in big print here is that kind of cognitive scenario, or a way of characterising laughing by way of a certain scenario. Now this is not supposed to be a scientific description of laughing. This is supposed to be what ordinary people would mean or could be interpreted to mean when they say that someone was laughing. So we refer to a scenario where people often do this when they feel something good for a short time because they think like this. Something is happening here not like at many other times, so they perceive something unusual going on, so to say. And at the same time they think people here can feel something good because of it. So this unusual event is co-construed as a sort of pro-social event. So if you were to see some horrible thing happening, someone slaughtering somebody, you wouldn't be inclined to be laughing. But if, according to this explication, these two elements are somehow coded into us, and there's a physical description too that involves laughing, involving some parts of the mouth moving, it being visible and usually audible. So people in the place where there's someone who's conceived, at the same time they can hear something, and it's sort of revealing somehow of the good feeling. So this is quite a complex package. If it's true that this is a universal or near universal, it's saying something very deep about the value of laughing in human sociality, in the way of being together. And this is compatible actually with lots of findings about the importance of laughing It by no means means that laughing is only found in this particular situation, because it says that people often do this. At least one thinks of laughing as something that's connected with the scenario. We know that people can laugh nervously, they can laugh out of embarrassment and so on. That means that they are laughing, they're doing this because they're nervous, or they're doing this because they're embarrassed, or what the case may be. I want to also say something about the feeling behind laughing and humour. Wallace Chafe authored a very amazing book called The Importance of Not Being Earnest, and the subtitle is about the feeling of, the feeling of laughter and humour. And he also talks about the feeling of non-seriousness. And he emphasises a lot in this book, from quite a phenomenological point of view, that there is a feeling associated with laughing. It's not just any old good feeling. The claim is that and there is a psychology of this, a social psychology to do with the body and so on. I'm not going to go into it, but I really wanted to draw attention to it because it's important. If we now look at a very important English word, funny. Okay, so, I mean, in English this is the word. It's the most simple, the most naive, ordinary word, unfortunately not translatable into many languages. So let's say something funny happened somewhere. What does that mean? Well, according to this, it means that something happened in this place. Things like this don't happen at many times in many places. People in this place could feel something good because of it, and that people in this place could laugh because of it. So to say that something funny happened is to say that it's a sort of event which could elicit laughter on account of it being unusual. If someone says or does something funny, well, they say something which is not like what people say at many times, and similarly, people could feel something good and could laugh because of it. So that's what, it's claimed that that's what it means, something that's funny. Notice here there's nothing very intellectual about this. It's not necessarily about saying something. An event can be a funny event, and very often in English they are. So there's a show called Australia's Funniest Home Videos, and there's a version obviously in America and other countries. You can see a lot of very funny things on this show. For instance, there was a sheep playing football and, you know, heading the ball into the net and so on. This is very funny, right? It's different in the case of amusing. So amusing is a more intellectual word. It's got a more cognitive dimension, and this is our attempt at I must say, when I say our, I mean these explications have been workshopped jointly by myself and Professor Anna. So to say that someone did something amusing, or they said something, and one can construe what they said, so someone can think about this. People don't do or say things like this at many times, the same kind of component, but notice the difference here. If someone knows about this someone can feel something good, like people feel when they laugh. This is not saying that amusing things are likely to elicit laughter. It's the other way around. They're saying that amusing things cause someone to feel something like people feel often when they laugh. You wouldn't expect to find children using the word amusing. This is a more sophisticated concept. It involves a different sort of construal and a different kind of subtlety, so to say, of social cognition. If you compare the two like that, you can see it. The difference between feeling something good, like people often feel when they laugh, in the case of amusing person, they could feel something good and could actually laugh, in the case of funny. So, moving on, I thought I'd have a go at humour. This is my attempt to explicate part of the meaning of humour in English. So the idea is that a certain social scenario occurs, someone says some things in a place where there are some other people, it's a social kind of saying, and the person says it with this in mind: if I say this, these people can feel something good, like people often feel when they laugh. I want this. So that's something like the intent to amuse, if we wanted to go back to English-specific words. This is very closely linked to the word amusing. And I've added this last component here, which is perhaps not fully justified, but the idea is that if you call something humour, you're giving it some credit as being potentially effective. It's the question of, like, in our bad art. Is it art if it's bad? If it's failed humour, is it humour? So we could dispense with this last. Now I want to move to the interactional side of things. What I mean by that is, let's have a look at English verbs. Let's have a look at joking, which is the premier English verb in this field. Even though these days joking may well be, outclassed by kidding. And my colleague Michael Hall's talk is coming up on kidding, so particularly the use of the expression just kidding. So kidding is actually now a very important word, and I would say to you that it's not just, oh well, it's more or less the same as joking. There must be some difference. And if we could understand it, we could get an insight into what the interlocutors, the speakers, the people, what they think they're doing with this kidding or this joking, and also with teasing. So here we go. Just put it up all on one go, right? So the basic idea is that if you were to say, I'll put this into first person, it just makes the explication easier to read. So if you say, I was joking, what are you saying? What are you saying? Well, you're saying that when you said it, whatever it was, I thought about it like this. I want to say this because I want someone here to laugh. Like people often laugh when they feel something good. I don't say it because of anything else. This makes it a little bit like play. Right? Because remember, playing, that's what the children do when they do something because they want to feel something good and not for anything else. So the ostensive intention of someone who's joking is to elicit, you want other people to laugh, as people often laugh when they feel something good. And there is something about the performance aspect. At the same time, even though I'm saying it not because of anything else, I want to say it like people often say something when they say it because of something else. This is bordering into something like an imitation. I mean, various humour forms. They usually kind of are parasitic on other genres or other ways of speaking. And it's usually pretty obvious though, and because the person also appears to have the thought that if someone hears this, she can know that it's like this. So the claim here is that I wanted to put it in a more less formal way. The joking is out to get a laugh in a good way, and it's understood to be pretty obvious, or at least the speaker appears to have the impression that it should be pretty obvious that this is what it's about. So it's very much like trying to be funny. If you look on the handout, go back to the explication for funny, compare it to this, you'll see that there's a big overlap of components. And this explains why, when it comes to explaining the meaning of humour in English, many dictionaries and ordinary people will use the word funny. The other word, of course, that they'll use is amusing. I think actually, if you really line them up, amusing is more linked with kidding than with joking. And kidding, this is our attempt to explicate kidding. The idea is that the person who is kidding wants to say this because they want someone here, doesn't have to be the addressee, could be someone else, to feel something good, like people often feel when they laugh. I don't say this because I want someone to know something. At the same time, I want to say it like people can say something when they say it because they want someone to know something. Now, if you can digest that, it seems to indicate that the form of kidding could be, so to speak, for false informing. It can sound like the kind of things you say when you're kidding could sound, so to say, real, as though you were trying to inform somebody of something, or perhaps to ask a question. And furthermore, it's not necessarily immediately obvious, because in this case, if someone here thinks about this for a short time, she can know it. So you're not assuming that as soon as you hear it, you would know it, but you would assume that a little bit of thought and someone can easily get it. Yeah. If you compare those two explications, you'll also find that joking correlates closely with funny, and teasing correlates more closely with amusing. I think actually in interactional data you even see indications of this in terms of how loud the laughter is and when it occurs. On average, not every time, of course. Because teasing is so important, I actually thought it was worthwhile to have a go at emphasising teasing. I believe that French may, in fact, have many more words in its lexicon to do with verbal provocations and other manipulation, so to say, than English does. English, teasing is a very important word in English, and it's one of those words which is heavily technicalised now. So big literature on teasing. From a lexicographical point of view, and looking at the word in the language, I think you can argue that teasing means that it's associated with a sort of speaker intention, like, well, let's start from the top. So you're teasing someone. You very often tease somebody about something connected with them. For instance, there's a girl called Katie. She's a schoolgirl. And her friends say, when they see Mario come along, they say, oh, look, here comes Katie's boyfriend. They don't necessarily say that to her, but they say it so that she can hear it. So you say some things about this person, like, here comes a boyfriend, you want her to hear it. And you're aware of the fact that if someone doesn't want people to say such things, and you know that if you say them, this person can feel something bad. At the same time, someone here can feel someone else here, which could be me, it could be the audience, can feel something good, like people often feel when they laugh, and that's your reason for saying it, ostensive reason for saying it. Someone who claims I was teasing, according to my understanding, is claiming this. It doesn't mean that's what they're really doing, of course. They might be a very nasty person, doing a very unpleasant thing. But if they explain their action, if they take cover under the word teasing, this is in my view, this is the intention that they're claiming. And they're also claiming the idea that they don't think that the person who feels something bad will feel something very bad. Okay, so moving towards conclusions. This, in a way, has been a little dissection of Anglo-ethnopragmatics, looking at the important verbs, most important interaction verbs of English, teasing, joking and kidding. And I'm actually wanting people not to ever use those words again in describing other languages, except as a convenience, as a sort of heuristic, because we may be writing in English. But from a point of view of scientific description, it's not good. What would be better would be to use simply phrased components, using those simple cross-translatable words. And that would be the sort of formal part of the description. Of course, the advantages are that they, using this kind of methodology would allow researchers to, as we say in the jargon of linguistics, access insider perspectives. So we use words and expressions used by people themselves to get inside their heads, as it were, and to help see things as they see them. We render those interpretations into accessible non-technical language, which is translatable. And this can contribute to, I believe, to a more exact and systematic methodology for dealing with conversation and humour. It can be added to many other forms of methodology. It's nothing to do with data gathering, interactional aspects. Many things can just be a value added. Instead of being a nuisance and a hindrance, lexical differences between languages become a resource, something that helps inform our work, and we can learn from it. And even, although I haven't mentioned cultural scripts, they are suitable for making larger generalisations. And if you use cultural scripts and explications together, then you can bear on what is sometimes called the macro-micro problem. At the moment we're in quite a micro phase in terms of interactional pragmatics due to new technologies which enable us to look in microscopic detail at conversational interactions, but we still feel the desire to unify somehow with larger cultural themes and values, and given more time I could do that. And finally, it helps to decouple the scholarly discourse from the English language, while still allowing you to converse in English, but the central parts of the description or explanation are no longer, those parts are English-proof. That's the idea. But the barriers. Last couple of words on the barriers. At the last IPRA conference, Neil Norrick, who was commenting on the session, said in relation to my talk, I don't see what's so bad about Anglocentrism. This stuff is hard enough as it is, causing audible gasp from non-English speakers in the room. But you can see, firstly, Neil likes to make a wisecrack. And the second thing is you can see that the second sentence is very important. He sees this as adding to the difficulty. I don't. I think it's helping to find solutions. But this is something we have to overcome. The idea that this additional methodology is hard enough as it is. It's hard enough if you already have excellent command of English and you don't worry about the dangers of Anglocentrism. And Marina Kerfarafi, who I have not met, and generally I'm an admirer of much of her work, and she has in fact worked in lexical semantics herself, discussing the whole idea of politeness 1 not so long ago. She expressed a sort of impatience, I would say, with the danger of talking about politeness, that it could become just an exercise in lexical semantics. And again, I think that's misguided. I think that drilling into the lexical semantics is not a distraction that would keep us away from our core business. And I also think it's rather unfortunate that she seems to assume that the phenomenon exists independently. Objectively, independently, we all know what we're talking about. We don't need to understand our terms and concepts any better than we do at the moment. I think she was not in a good moment when she wrote that passage. Another problem, aside from these attitudinal barriers, is that actually constructing NSM scripts and explications is hard work. Even though you may wind up with this simplistic sounding paraphrases, actually doing that work is difficult and time consuming, and it requires advanced level instruction. So what to do? One possibility is to encourage people not to try for full explications, but to just try for the key component. You know, try to capture the most important idea you've got. It could be done in one sentence, right, without all the textual complications of a full explication. I think that would be an advance. And there's something called the minimal English approach, which you can read about. There's a reference in a downloadable paper. There's a reference to that in the handout. So that's basically compromising on the perfectionist aspects, the very precisionist aspects of NSM, and encouraging a more informal, selective use. A second thing is skills development and training. I think we, especially people who may be fortunate enough to be senior academics or running courses, we need to encourage our graduate students to attend workshops and to learn about this kind of methodology as a normal part of their training. And I'm encouraged to think in a way, think what happened with CA style transcription. It's truly amazing that these days many people learn the rudiments of CA style transcription in undergraduate courses. I would look forward to a time when basic semantics is also something which is just integrated in as a normal tool of the trade. Among we people, we scholars, we have to combat the tendency to play it safe and stick to our own area. But that goes for me as well. I have to combat that tendency to stick to NSM and to ethnopragmatics and learn as much as I can about other areas. And we should, in my opinion, be saying that to ourselves. Specialisation is good, but we do need to overcome this tendency. And there's a saying in real estate, and these are my last 3 words. There's a saying in real estate, location, location, location. This is the thing. The conversation, humour, cross cultures. Collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. Thank you.